ash, ruin, and a promise whispered through 5 centuries of suffocating darkness. Nathaniel sacrificed empires just to track her fractured soul across time. He expected a grand, world-shaking reunion. He certainly didn't expect to find the undisputed queen of the night wiping down a pastry case in a Seattle coffeehouse. Rain battered the large glass windows of Café Umbria on Occidental Avenue, blurring the neon streetlights into streaks of fractured crimson and gold. Inside the espresso machine hissed a harsh, mechanical gasp that matched the exhaustion deep in Harper Lawson's chest. At 24, Harper's life was an endless loop of steamed milk customer complaints and the crushing weight of medical debt from her younger brother's leukemia treatments. There was no room for fairy tales in her world, let alone nightmares. The bell above the heavy oak door chimed. The evening rush had died down hours ago, and the sudden draft of freezing November air made Harper shiver in her damp apron. A man stepped into the ambient amber lighting of the shop. He didn't walk. He glided. That was the only word Harper's overtired brain could summon. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat that looked like it cost more than her entire college tuition, completely untouched by the torrential Pacific Northwest downpour outside. His dark hair was immaculately styled, but it was his face that made Harper freeze with a ceramic mug halfway to the sink. He possessed a brutal aristocratic beauty. High, sharp cheekbones, a jawline carved from marble, and eyes the color of bruised violets. Those eyes locked onto her instantly, and the world seemed to stop spinning. The ambient jazz music playing over the speakers faded into a dull hum. Harper's breath caught in her throat. A strange, violent sense of déjà vu slammed into her ribs, so intense it made her dizzy. Nathaniel Reed stood perfectly still, his heart dormant for the better part of a decade, giving a singular, agonizing thud against his sternum. 502 years. He had walked through the ashes of London in 1666, stood on the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg, and built a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire in the modern era, all while hollowed out by grief. His wife, Genevieve, had been ripped from his arms in a stone courtyard in France, condemned by the church, and burned before Nathaniel could slaughter the tribunal. For 5 centuries, he had hunted for her reincarnation. He had hired psychics trackers and private investigators, enduring decades of false hope and crushing disappointment. And now here she was, smelling of roasted Arabica beans, cheap vanilla perfume, and the unmistakable, intoxicating undercurrent of wildflowers and rain that belonged only to Genevieve. He approached the counter. Every instinct in his predatory nature screamed at him to vault the polished wood, claim her and tear apart anyone who looked at her. He forced his hands deep into his coat pockets, his knuckles turning white to suppress the violent trembling in his immortal limbs. "Can I—" Harper swallowed hard, her voice betraying a slight tremor. She wiped her hands on a bar towel, suddenly hyper-aware of the dark circles under her eyes and the coffee stain on her collar. "Can I help you, sir?" "A black coffee," Nathaniel said. His voice was a dark, resonant baritone that sent a literal shockwave of static electricity down Harper's spine. "No sugar, no cream." "Right, of course." Harper turned to the drip machine, her hands shaking so badly she fumbled the paper cup. As she poured, she felt the oppressive weight of his gaze. It wasn't the creepy, leering stare of a late-night regular. It was something heavier. It felt like worship. It felt like possession. She placed the cup on the counter. "That'll be $3.50. Nathaniel withdrew a sleek, matte black leather wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. His fingers, clad in thin leather gloves, brushed against Harper's bare skin. A jolt of sheer, freezing electricity snapped between them. Harper gasped, snatching her hand back, knocking the paper cup. Hot coffee spilled across the counter, splashing onto Nathaniel's expensive coat. "Oh my God!" Harper panicked, grabbing a fistful of napkins. "I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy, Leave it, Nathaniel commanded, his voice unnervingly calm. He didn't even glance at the scalding liquid soaking into his sleeve. His violet eyes were fixed entirely on her face, cataloguing every freckle, the exact curve of her lips, the way her pulse fluttered wildly at the base of her throat. It was her. The universe hadn't played a cruel trick. It was truly her. I can pay for the dry cleaning, Harper babbled, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and an inexplicable fear. Please let me. Harper, he said. She stopped, the soggy napkins clutched in her hand. How do you know my name? Nathaniel glanced down at the green plastic name tag pinned to her apron. Your tag? Right, she breathed, feeling incredibly stupid. Look, take the change at least. Keep it, Nathaniel replied softly. You need it more than I do. Before she could process the strange weight of that statement, he turned and walked out into the pouring rain, leaving the coffee untouched. Harper stood frozen behind the counter for a long time. When she finally went to clear the mess, she noticed he had left something else beside the $100 bill. It was a heavy silver coin, deeply tarnished, bearing the crest of a wolf tangled in thorns. A crest from the 1500s. That night, in her cramped, drafty apartment in Capitol Hill, Harper didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she didn't see the peeling wallpaper of her bedroom. She saw a massive stone fireplace. She smelled wood smoke and blood. And she heard a man screaming her name with a voice that sounded exactly like the stranger from the coffee shop. By Friday, Harper was convinced she was losing her mind. The stranger hadn't returned to Cafe Umbria, but his presence lingered like a ghost. Harper found herself constantly looking at the door, her heart doing a frantic stutter every time the bell chimed. The silver coin sat on her nightstand, cold to the touch and impossibly heavy. When she tried to look up the crest on the internet, she found nothing but obscure references to a defunct French bloodline that was wiped out in the 16th century. But the stranger was the least of her immediate problems. Someone was following her. It started subtly. A dark grey sedan parked idling across the street from her apartment building. A man in a tan trench coat pretending to read a newspaper at the bus stop, his eyes always tracking her movements. Harper, hardened by years of living in the city, knew the signs of a stalker. She gripped her pepper spray tight in her pocket every time she walked home. On a bitterly cold Tuesday night, her shift ended at 11:30 p.m. The streets were dead, the rain having turned into a sharp, icy sleet. Harper decided to take the shortcut through the alley behind the Pioneer Square brick buildings to catch the last light rail train. It was a mistake she realized the moment the shadows swallowed her. Footsteps echoed behind her, heavy, deliberate. Harper quickened her pace, her boots splashing in the freezing puddles. The footsteps matched her rhythm. She pulled the pepper spray from her pocket, her thumb resting on the safety. "Harper Lawson," a voice rasped. She spun around. Standing under a flickering sodium light was the man in the tan trench coat. Up close, he looked rough. His face scarred, his eyes wild and bloodshot. But it was the object in his hand that made Harper's blood run cold. It wasn't a gun. It was an intricately carved, silver-bladed dagger glowing faintly under the street lamp. "Who are you? What do you want?" Harper yelled, holding up the pepper spray. "Stay back. I swear I'll spray you." The man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Mace won't stop a hunter girl. I know what you are. Or rather, I know what he thinks you are. The Crescent Order pays a premium for leverage against the immortal king." "What the hell are you talking about? I'm a barista," she screamed, backing away. "You're bait!" the man sneered, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Harper squeezed the trigger on the pepper spray, but the man swatted it away, as if it were a toy, the canister clattering uselessly against the brick wall. He grabbed her by the throat, slamming her hard against the cold, wet masonry. The air exploded from her lungs. Black spots danced in her vision as the cold edge of the silver blade pressed against her cheek. "Let's see how fast he comes when he smells your blood," the hunter hissed. Suddenly the air in the alley dropped 20 degrees. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and detach from the walls. The hunter didn't even have time to turn his head. A blur of charcoal and violent motion slammed into the man. The force of the impact created a sickening crunch of bone. Harper fell to her knees, gasping for air, clutching her bruised throat. Through the icy rain, she watched a nightmare unfold. The stranger from the coffee shop, Nathaniel, had the hunter, pinned by the throat against the opposite wall, holding him 3 feet off the ground with a single hand. Nathaniel's face had changed. The aristocratic veneer was gone, replaced by a mask of pure ancient fury. His jaw was unhinged slightly, and terrifying, elongated fangs gleamed in the dim light. The veins under his eyes were pitch black, pulsing with a demonic rhythm. Declan Walsh. Nathaniel's voice was no longer human. It was the sound of grinding tectonic plates. "You dare touch what is mine!" The hunter. Declan clawed frantically at Nathaniel's iron grip, his legs kicking in the empty air. She is nothing. You're a fool, Reed. I am your death," Nathaniel whispered. With a horrifyingly casual flick of his wrist, he snapped Declan's neck. The crack echoed loudly in the narrow alley. Nathaniel dropped the lifeless body into a puddle, ignoring the way the silver dagger clattered across the pavement. Harper scrambled backward, her hand scraping against the rough asphalt, a scream locked tight in her throat. She couldn't breathe. Monsters were real. Vampires were real. And one of them was turning to look at her. Nathaniel's demonic features slowly receded. The black veins faded, the fangs retracted, and the smooth, tragically beautiful face of the billionaire returned. He stepped toward her, his movements slow, telegraphing his intent so as not to startle her further. He took off his expensive overcoat and knelt in the freezing puddle, wrapping it gently around her trembling shoulders. "Do not fear me," he pleaded, his voice breaking slightly. The immense vulnerability in his tone completely contradicted the brutal murder he had just committed. "Please, Genevieve, look at me." My name is Harper," she sobbed, pulling the coat tight around herself, overwhelmed by the scent of cedar and ozone. What was that?" "I am the man who has spent 5 centuries looking for you," Nathaniel said, softly reaching out to gently touch the red mark on her neck where the hunter had gripped her. His cold fingers instantly soothed the burning pain. "Come with me. I will explain everything, but you are no longer safe here, too exhausted, terrified, and oddly mesmerized to refuse." Harper let him lift her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to a sleek black Rolls-Royce waiting at the edge of the alley. 20 minutes later, Harper was sitting on a velvet sofa in a penthouse that overlooked the entire Seattle skyline. The luxury of the space was dizzying, vaulted ceilings, modern art, and a massive fireplace that crackled with a roaring fire. A private doctor, a discreet man on Nathaniel's payroll, had already checked her throat and left. Nathaniel walked into the room holding a glass of amber liquid. He handed it to her. "Drink. It's bourbon. It will calm your nerves." Harper took a sip, the alcohol burning a welcome trail down her throat. She looked at him, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city. "You called me Genevieve." Nathaniel turned, his violet eyes locking onto hers. In 1524, Genevieve was the wife of a French lord. She was brilliant, stubborn, and had a laugh that could shame the sun. She was executed for witchcraft by men who feared her intelligence and my power. He paused, the centuries of grief heavy in his posture. "I was turned into this creature in a desperate bid to save her. I was too late, and you think I'm her?" Harper asked, shaking her head. "I'm a barista. I have student loans. I'm taking care of my brother Tommy. I'm not a reincarnated French aristocrat." Nathaniel didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to a massive canvas covered by a silk drape in the center of the room. I bought this apartment building, and the one you live in the moment I saw you in the cafe. I had to secure your perimeter. The man in the alley was a mercenary for a rival vampire faction. They monitor my movements. When they saw me react to you, they knew you were my singular weakness. You bought my building. Harper was reeling. I bought the block, Nathaniel corrected gently. He reached for the silk drape. You do not believe me. You think this is the delusion of a madman. I do not blame you. But look at this. He pulled the drape away. Harper stood up, the bourbon glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the hardwood floor. It was an oil painting cracked with age, dated in the bottom right corner. It was a portrait of a woman standing in a lush garden. The woman had the exact same wild, curly chestnut hair, the same smattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, the exact same heterochromia, one eye hazel, one eye green, a genetic rarity that Harper had been teased for her whole life. But it wasn't just the face that made Harper's knees give out. The woman in the centuries-old painting was wearing a dark green velvet dress with silver embroidery climbing up the bodice like ivy. Harper began to hyperventilate. She stumbled backward until her back hit the stone mantelpiece. Just yesterday, during her break at the coffee shop, she had been sketching in her notebook. She had designed that exact dress down to the millimeter of the silver ivy embroidery, thinking it was just a random burst of creative inspiration. How? Harper choked out, her vision swimming. Nathaniel crossed the room in a blink, catching her before she could collapse. His cold, strong arms wrapped around her, solid and anchoring. Welcome home, my queen, he whispered into her hair. The waiting is over. Morning sunlight failed to pierce the heavy velvet blackout curtains of the penthouse. Harper awoke, wrapped in sheets, spun from Egyptian cotton, the events of the previous night hitting her like a freight train. The stalker, the alleyway, the monster who became a billionaire. The painting of a woman who wore her exact face. She threw off the covers and bolted out of the guest bedroom. Nathaniel was sitting in the sprawling living room, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked like he hadn't moved an inch since she fell asleep. My brother, Harper blurted out, her voice rough. The supernatural terror was secondary to the crushing anxiety that had ruled her life for 3 years. Tommy is at Swedish Medical Center. If those people, the Crescent Order, or whoever know about me, they might go after him. Nathaniel stood, smoothing the lapels of his charcoal suit. I have already taken care of it. At 4:00 a.m., Thomas was transferred via private ambulance to a secure VIP wing at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center. I have enlisted Dr. Benjamin Carter, the leading pediatric oncologist on the West Coast, to oversee his case. Every nurse on that floor is secretly on my payroll. Your brother's medical debts have been wiped clean. Harper stared at him, her mouth opening and closing in stunned silence. You paid off $200,000 just like that. I would burn the world to ash if it brought you a moment of peace. Nathaniel said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that made her pulse flutter. Money is nothing. Your family is under my protection now. Tears pricked Harper's eyes. For years she had fought the world entirely alone, drowning in bills, double shifts, and the terrifying beeping of hospital monitors. Now this ancient, terrifying king had simply waved a hand and shattered her heaviest burdens. Before she could thank him, her cell phone buzzed in her coat pocket. It was a text from Lily Simmons, her closest friend and co-worker at Cafe Umbria. Harper, where are you? Did you make it home last night? Heard sirens near the alley. I'm freaking out. Meet me at the hospital. It's my friend, Lily, Harper said, looking up. She's worried about me. I need to go see Tommy, and I need to tell Lily I'm safe. A shadow crossed Nathaniel's aristocratic face. The city is volatile. Dominic Hayes, the leader of the local Crescent Order faction, is hunting. They want to use your blood to break the warding spells on my Seattle territories. I will accompany you. The hospital wing was unlike anything Harper had ever seen. There were no harsh fluorescent lights or smells of bleach. It looked like a high-end luxury hotel. Tommy, pale but smiling, was watching cartoons on a massive flat-screen TV. For the first time in months, he had color in his cheeks. Harper hugged him tightly, weeping softly into his hospital gown. Nathaniel stood watch at the door, an imposing sentinel of lethal grace. "Your boyfriend is weird, Harp," Tommy whispered, pointing at Nathaniel. "But he bought me a PlayStation 5, so I approve." Harper laughed, a wet, broken sound. "He's not my boyfriend, Tommy. He's a very old friend. I am whatever she commands me to be," Nathaniel replied from the doorway, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The tender moment shattered when the heavy oak door of the suite burst open. Standing in the corridor was Lily Simmons, but she wasn't wearing her Cafe Umbria apron. She wore tactical black Kevlar holding a suppressed Heckler & Koch submachine gun. Behind her stood 3 heavily armed mercenaries with glowing ultraviolet tactical visors. "Sorry, Harper," Lily said, her voice completely devoid of the bubbly warmth Harper had known for 2 years. "But Dominic pays a hell of a lot better than the coffee shop." Harper's stomach dropped. "Lily, what are you doing? Taking the Queen off the board?" Lily sneered. Everything happened in a chaotic, deafening blur. Nathaniel roared a sound that shattered the reinforced glass of the hospital windows. He moved faster than human sight, intercepting a hail of bullets meant for Harper. The rounds tore through his tailored suit, spraying dark, thick blood across the pristine white floor, but he didn't even flinch. He backhanded the first mercenary, the sheer kinetic force sending the man flying through the drywall into the adjacent corridor. "Get behind the bed," Nathaniel commanded Harper, his eyes glowing a violent, demonic violet. His fangs fully extended, he lunged at the remaining attackers. He was a force of ancient, unstoppable carnage, tearing weapons from their hands and snapping limbs with horrifying ease. But Lily was smart. She didn't aim for the immortal king. She aimed for the human boy on the bed. She raised her weapon toward Tommy. "No!" Harper screamed. Without thinking, driven by a primal instinct older than time itself, Harper threw herself across her brother's fragile body, just as Lily pulled the trigger. The impact felt like being struck by a sledgehammer. 3 rounds caught Harper in the torso, punching through her ribs and collapsing her left lung. She hit the floor hard, a sickening spray of red painting, the sterile hospital tiles. "Harper!" Tommy shrieked in absolute terror. The sound that tore from Nathaniel's throat was not a roar. It was the agonizing wail of a grieving god. He materialized in front of Lily, his hand plunging straight through her Kevlar vest and into her chest cavity. He ripped her heart out in a shower of gore, discarding her lifeless body like trash. The remaining mercenaries fled in sheer, pants-wetting terror, but Nathaniel didn't pursue them. He dropped to his knees, sliding across the bloody floor to gather Harper into his arms. "No, no, no!" Nathaniel chanted, his cold hands pressing desperately against the gaping wounds in her chest. Blood bubbled past Harper's lips. "Genevieve, please. Not again. I cannot watch you die again." Harper looked up at the ceiling, her vision blurring at the edges. The agonizing pain in her chest was slowly being replaced by a strange, numb warmth. And then the dam broke. Memories that did not belong to Harper Lawson flooded her dying brain. She saw cobblestone streets in a French village. She smelled the heavy scent of lavender and impending rain. She saw Nathaniel dressed in a sweeping velvet cloak, offering her a stolen white rose in the shadow of a cathedral. She remembered the heat of the flames licking at her boots as the inquisitors chanted in Latin. She remembered his agonizing scream as he watched her burn. "I will find you," his voice echoed in her mind, crossing centuries of time. "Even if I must tear heaven and hell apart." "Nathaniel," she whispered. But it wasn't Harper's cadence. It was an older, refined accent. She reached up her bloody fingers, tracing the sharp curve of his jaw. You took entirely too long to find me, my love. Nathaniel gasped, tears of blood tracking down his pale cheeks. Genevieve, you remember. I remember everything. She smiled weakly, her breathing growing incredibly shallow. But I am dying, Nathaniel. It hurts. I can save you, he pleaded, pressing his forehead against hers. I can give you the dark gift. But you must choose it. I will not damn you without your consent. Choose to stay with me. Harper looked past his shoulder to where Tommy was cowering on the bed, terrified but unharmed. She had fought so hard for this life. She had fought to keep her brother safe. But the ancient soul inside her knew that her destiny was not to die on a linoleum floor. She was a queen, and her king was waiting. "Turn me," she rasped her eyes, holding his steady. "Make me yours." Without hesitation, Nathaniel brought his wrist to his own mouth and tore his flesh with his fangs. Dark, pulsing immortal blood welled from the wound. He pressed his bleeding wrist against Harper's lips. "Drink, my queen," he commanded softly. Harper drank. The vampire blood hit her system like liquid fire. It burned through her collapsing veins, incinerating her mortality. Her spine arched as her heart gave one final violent spasm, stopped completely, and then roared back to life with a terrifying rhythmic thud. The pain vanished. Her wounds knit together in seconds, the bullets pushing out of her flesh and clattering onto the floor. Harper opened her eyes. The world had shifted. She could hear the frantic beating of Tommy's heart across the room. She could see the microscopic dust motes dancing in the air. She sat up, power coursing through her newly immortal limbs. She looked down at her blood-soaked hands, then up at Nathaniel. He was watching her with absolute, terrifying devotion. He bowed his head, resting it against her knee. "My life is yours, Genevieve, for the rest of eternity." Harper reached out, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, pulling his face up to meet hers. "My name," she said, her voice ringing with newfound dangerous authority, "is Harper. Genevieve is the past. We rule the future." Nathaniel smiled a predatory, glorious expression. "As you command. If you loved this dark, heart-pounding tale of ancient romance betrayal, and a love that literally conquered death, do not forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more intense supernatural audio stories, and share this video with someone who loves a billionaire vampire king. Drop a comment below. Would you have chosen immortality to stay with Nathaniel? Let us know, and we will see you in the next dark romance.